Is there evidence that the Earth isn't millions of years old?
And if there is, why don't we hear about it in the media?
Coming up on Creation Magazine Live, scientific evidence for a young Earth. Welcome to Creation Magazine Live, the program that gives Christians the kind of faith-building information that you find in Creation Magazine.
The age of the Earth is a controversial subject. When we go around to churches, we could take surveys. How many people here believe in creation? And most of the hands would shoot up. But
right.
if we ask people how many people believe that God created relatively recently in 6 literal days, and that was followed by a global flood, not as many hands would go up.
Right.
And so it's a controversial issue, but we're going to be talking about that on this show. Evolutionists need the universe to be very old.
Right.
They absolutely require the millions of years.
No one would believe in the concept of evolution if they believed that the Earth was roughly 6,000 years old.
Right. So evidence for a young Earth is actually powerful evidence against evolution.
Right.
And we'll be looking at some of that on the show. Evolutionists need, in geology, they need slow and gradual processes in geology. In astronomy, they talk about the Big Bang, stellar evolution,
right.
Planetary evolution, and so on. And in biology, they need the time to build up the mutations to build these bigger and better living things that evolution talks about.
Right. But, you know, scientists can't actually measure age. Like, age isn't something you can stick in some kind of chronometer and figure it out. You're always making assumptions whenever you're using an age dating method. So you're saying that there's, you know, certain decay rates or erosion rates or sedimentation rates or
right.
whatever like that, and you're also assuming that they're constant. Because whatever kind of dating method you're going to use, you're going to say, well, what we see in the present, we see these, you know, whether the half-lives in some kind of radioactive decay, or whether they're erosion rates or sedimentation, you're assuming that they've gone on in the same fashion throughout time, and that way you can get an accurate measurement and then extrapolate
right.
that, et cetera, et cetera.
And we have microscopes and telescopes, but we don't have pastascopes.
Right.
So on the show today, we'll be talking about scientific evidence for a young world.
To imply that biblical writers were primitive, many people have said that the Bible teaches that the earth is flat, even though the round shape of our planet was an obvious conclusion when watching ships disappear over the horizon and by observing eclipse shadows. What does the Bible say? The implication of a round earth is seen in the New Testament, where Jesus described his return. In Luke 17:31, Jesus said, "In that day," then in verse 34, "in that night." This is an allusion to light on one side of the globe and darkness on the other simultaneously. In the Old Testament, we read in Isaiah 40:22, "It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth." Inspired by their Creator, the earth shape was well known to biblical writers.
Creation Ministries International staff, many from a wide variety of scientific disciplines, have produced thousands of articles now available in a massive online database. www.creationontheweb.org has grown to become the world's most powerful internet resource on the creation evolution issue. There are more than 5,000 articles already online, and new articles are added daily. Some of the topics covered include the feasibility of Noah's Ark and the evidence for a global flood, the age of the earth from both the Bible and science, scientific arguments against the Big Bang and models that explain observations in astronomy within a young earth time frame, recent discoveries that support dinosaurs fitting with biblical history, and many, many more topics. These thousands of articles are available for free 24 hours a day to anyone on earth with an internet connection. One of the main reasons that CMI built this website is to strengthen the faith of Christians. Genesis is one of the most attacked areas of the Bible. Creationontheweb.org provides logical, scientifically accurate counterattacks in this area. As 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 says, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God." Got questions? Get answers at creationontheweb.org.
For years, one popular evidence for a recent creation was to argue that the amount of dust on the moon must have accumulated in less than 10,000 years. The claim was based on early estimates of the rate at which dust from space accumulates on the moon's surface. If the moon really is billions of years old, there was concern that the Apollo moon landers would sink into a deep layer of dust. However, these early estimates were wrong, and by the time of the Apollo landings, NASA was not worried about sinking spacecraft. The new data makes this argument for a young moon invalid. For details, visit the Arguments Creationists Shouldn't Use section at creationontheweb.org.
So we're talking about the age of the Earth today and scientific methods that you can use to try to estimate how old the Earth is. And of course, this is a big issue in creation evolution because, like you said, if evolutionists didn't have millions of years to work with their theory, then they wouldn't have had millions of years to evolve all the things.
It wouldn't work without the large timescales.
Right. So an important concept, because I'm sure you get it just like I do and all the speakers do in CMI when we're out speaking, is people will say, well, what about radiometric dating? What about this? And what about these age dating methods that date the Earth at supposedly millions of years old? And the thing we like to ask them is, well, what about the dating methods? About 90% of all dating methods, because there's many, many different ways you can try to estimate how old things are.
Right.
And 90% of these methods indicate an age that would be far younger than the evolutionary timescale would need. So most people don't realize that. They've just heard about the ones that supposedly do give an age of millions of years. But there's many, many, many methods that don't give anywhere near the vast ages you'd need to evolve things.
And that's what we're going to do on this show. We're going to just talk about a number of these different methods, and there's many, many more. You can go to our website, creationontheweb.org, and explore some of those and get more details. We should probably mention that on the show we can only talk in a surface way, in a very surfacey way about some of these things. The details really are in Creation Magazine and up on the website there.
Right.
Let's talk about helium. If we look at helium, what's going on there? Helium is pouring into the atmosphere from radioactive decay.
Right.
It's going in. It's escaping from the Earth's crust at about 67 grams per second. That's the rate today. Today, there's about 3.71 billion tons of helium in the atmosphere, and most of it's produced by radioactive decay.
Right.
It's as a byproduct. Now, with that amount of helium and at those rates, the atmosphere can only be 2 million years old.
So that's the most it can account for then.
There's one dating method. It would have taken 2 million years to build up the helium today in the atmosphere at the rates that we're measuring today.
Now, we've been talking a lot on this show about science and observable science. Now, we can measure things to quite amazing accuracy as far as, you were saying you gave the exact amount of helium that appears to be escaping.
Right.
Those are scientific things, or experiments, or observations
Sure.
we set up in the present. Here we are, we look at them, not enough time for evolution. But that's the actual facts. The facts are that this helium is escaping at a certain rate, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And if we make the assumptions, and all dating methods have assumptions,
right?
You assume that today's rates are the same rates that have gone on for millions of years.
Right.
If they went on for 2 million years, at these same rates today, the atmosphere would only be 2 million years old, but evolutionists say that it's 2,500 times older than that.
Right.
Older than 2 million years.
And I guess, really, if you're going to be fair, then if you're going to assume constant rates when you're talking about a dating method, then it wouldn't really be fair to say, well, here we're going to use a constant rate, but here something different must have happened. It's called uniformitarianism, the concept that the rates that we see today continue at the same rate.
That slow and steady process. The rates that we observe today are the same rates that have gone on into the indefinite past.
Because we talked before about the evidence for creation and the evidence for evolution. Well, no, we have facts. Now the fact here is that it it doesn't give you the evidence you need to have an evolutionary timescale.
Right, and we're using the evolutionists' own assumptions, uniformitarianism, right? The rates that we observe today, even using their own assumptions, in this case, we've got something that really makes you scratch your head if you're an evolutionist.
Right.
To us, the maximum age is 2 million years based on this particular dating method, helium in the atmosphere.
Right.
It could be much younger than that.
Right.
Of course.
We don't believe in 2 million years, but still.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So here's another one here. The supernovas. Supernovas are massive exploding stars.
Right.
And what you have here's a picture actually of the Crab Nebula, and this is a leftover of a massive explosion of a star.
Okay.
In the year 1054 AD, people were startled by the appearance of a new star. For a couple of weeks, it was so bright that it could be seen in broad daylight.
Wow.
Actually, that was for a couple of weeks. People could see that in broad daylight. Today, the Crab Nebula, the picture that you're seeing here on the screen,
right,
is what's left of the supernova explosion that they witnessed back there in 1054. Now, supernova remnants, the leftover bits of the explosion, the star,
right,
as it is, it should keep expanding for many, many years. And you have different stages of supernova. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3 are the very oldest ones. And you can make predictions. If the galaxy is young, the number of supernova remnants predicted should be different than the predictions if the universe is very, very old.
Okay.
And we can look at some of those predictions. For example, if the universe is billions of years old, there are the predictions. The number of observable supernova remnants predicted if our galaxy is billions of years old. If it's only 7,000 years old, or somewhere in that ballpark, the predictions of the number of supernova remnants we should see is, you can see there, very, very different. The actual number of supernova remnants observed, there it is. I mean, it doesn't fit the predictions of a billions of years old universe. Where are all the very advanced Stage 3 supernova remnants?
Well, as a matter of fact, as I'm looking at this chart you've brought up here, you're talking about first, second, and third stage supernova. So so first stage supernova, that's it's just exploded recently, and a second stage,
that's basically it. Yes.
It's a little older, and I noticed we haven't seen any third stage supernovas. What that means is there's no evidence for this stage 3. Like, it doesn't exist.
Well,
you're giving a name
no
to something
observable. Well, I mean, if the universe keeps going for millions of years, those should be observed. Or if it's billions of years old, those should be observed. But it's a theoretical prediction based on a billions-of-year-old universe.
Right. And again, the observation,
in this case, it doesn't fit.
It's not even close. Fit again.
In fact, the observations actually fit the predictions if the universe is young.
Right.
We've got another one, the Earth's magnetic field.
Right.
That's another evidence that's used. Creationists use that to talk about the magnetic field. The magnetic field today is decaying at a rate of about 5% per year.
Right.
5% per century. Sorry. Archaeological measurements show that the field was about 40% stronger in the year 1000.
Okay.
So it was stronger back then, but it's decaying so fast that the Earth couldn't possibly be more than 10,000 years old, because the magnetic field, it's thought, is created by electricity going through the Earth.
Right.
If you have the field would be so strong 10,000 years ago, there'd be so much electricity that it would melt the Earth. So, big problem.
So again, we're getting less pull, you could say, magnetic pull over time. Going backwards, you get more and more and more and more. You're saying in 10,000 years ago, it would have been so strong that it would have melted the Earth. There would have been so much energy going through the Earth that it would have melted the Earth. And we could talk about, well, people have said, well, there's evidence that the field has reversed. There's been magnetic reversals of the Earth's magnetic field. That's true, but that makes the problem even worse. And again, the details are there on our website, and this was written up in Creation Magazine, March 1998, and so the details are there. And had people subscribed to Creation Magazine, we wouldn't have to say this today. But there's all kinds of evidences for a young age for the Earth, and we'll talk more about them as we keep going here. But why bother with the age of the Earth anyway? Yeah. I think this is something that I run into a lot, even when you're just having casual conversation with other Christians, is, or even they discover I work for the ministry. Oh, okay, you're those guys, and you talk about science, and how do, and it's almost like, well, that must be a side issue. And of course, things like the age of the Earth, you mentioned it's controversial. People have different opinions on it. But it's important to understand that the whole concept of millions of years really came from geology, right? Those rock layers, those diagrams I got shown when I was in school with the fossils in it, were presented to me as proof of millions of years and proof of evolution, actually. Evolution answered the question for me, where did we come from? Well, we just evolved. Well, if you're going to evolve, you need millions and millions and millions of years to do it. And then, oh, how did that happen? Oh, well, here are these rock layers. But we talked about it before, and I'm sure we'll do a show on the flood, because I'm sure many people have many questions about Noah's flood.
The flood was amazing.
Noah's Ark and all those kinds of things. But that's a good explanation for the fossil layers come down. So really, you don't need millions of years to be a Christian and to be able to understand what the Bible says.
I mean, we've talked about this on previous shows as well. If you have millions of years of death and suffering before Adam sinned, you've got a problem. Theologically, there's a massive problem at that point, because now death is not the penalty for sin. Death has been around for millions of years. And so it actually affects the gospel message. So far from being a side issue, it's actually a critical issue for Christians to understand.
Jesus, the Creator. Jesus Christ, who walked the earth 2,000 years ago, is also the Creator of the universe. Colossians 1:16 says, "For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him." Also in John 1:3 we read, "All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made." Jesus Christ is the Creator God. Not only does Scripture confirm it, but during his earthly ministry, Jesus did things only the Creator God could do.
When Dr. Carl Whelan started Creation magazine in his home in 1978, little did he realize that today it would reach into some 140 countries all around the world and have such a huge impact in so many lives. This unique 56-page full-color family magazine refutes evolution and gives God the glory for the amazing creation we see all around us. It gives you the answers to defend your faith and uphold the true history of the world found in Genesis. Creation magazine is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page in Creation magazine is full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, every effort is made to ensure that the content is technically accurate so that even experts are satisfied. And young children look forward to the section written especially for them. The exciting articles also provide great witnessing material that you won't find anywhere else. Many have come to faith in Christ because of subscribers sharing this magazine with them. So subscribing not only boosts your faith, it enables you to get biblical truth into your community in a special way. Subscribe today and have it delivered to your home every 3 months. Visit www.creationontheweb.com for subscription information or call the CMI office nearest you.
Well, welcome back. So today we've been talking about scientific evidence that the Earth is actually young, not old as many people commonly read and hear and are taught about in schools.
Using uniformitarian assumptions, the same assumptions that evolutionists would use.
Right. So for example, let's talk about the moon for a little bit, and you can see a graphic here. But we know, we can measure that the moon is actually moving away from the Earth at about 4 centimeters per year. So it's actually drifting away from its orbit. Now, if you took that and you just, because as long as we've measured it, it's been doing that, and you just used that assumption and you went back in time, supposedly, this is what we're trying to do, extrapolate it backwards, you'd have the moon touching the Earth at about 1.37 billion years ago. Now, the Earth's supposed to be 4.6 billion years old. right?
Yeah, and the moon's roughly the same age, evolutionists are saying.
Because it's supposed to happen at the same time. So here's another scientific method. This is something we can do, an experiment, observe what's happening in the present, extrapolate the data backwards, and guess what? It doesn't add up to what evolution would need to occur.
Yeah, it's scientific in the sense that we're making certain observations about certain things, but as we've said repeatedly, there's different kinds of science, and when we're talking about origins, as we are with this ministry, with Creation Magazine, and so on, we have to make we have to interpret that scientific data, those scientific observations. We have to interpret things. And we're using the evolutionists' own interpretations. Here's another dating method, in this case the orbit of the moon. Mm-hmm. It's slowly decaying, it's getting larger, doesn't fit. And we can think of other things like salt pouring into the sea. Mm-hmm. It's another dating method. If you make certain assumptions, for example, today, salt is pouring into the sea much faster than it's escaping.
Right.
The sea is not nearly salty enough for this to have happened for billions of years.
Right.
If you assume that originally the sea had no salt,
right,
and you take present rates of salt going into the oceans could not possibly be older than 62 million years. Million, not billion.
Right. Now, the dinosaurs were supposed to die out about 70 million years old.
Well, evolutionists say that the oceans must be at least 3 billion years old.
Right.
But here's a dating method, but notice the assumptions, right? It's the same. If you assume that the ocean had no salt to begin with.
Right.
Well, if we look at the other side of the equation, how much salt did the ocean have in it when God created it?
Right.
There was a flood. That would have put huge amounts of salt into the ocean.
Right.
And so, but anyways, taking the uniformitarian rates,
right,
you get to an age for the ocean that does not fit at all with evolutionary theory.
Right. Now, salt's pouring into the oceans, and of course it gets washed in and stuff like that. Here's another way you can try to date the age of the Earth is through erosion.
Right.
Right. Just the fact that you get a lot of rainfall, you get one way you can get erosion is just on the edges of the continents. For example, my wife's from Nova Scotia, and Joggins, Nova Scotia has got the highest tides in the world. So the tides come in and they come out, and it's actually a lot of fun to go fossil hunting there, because each year you'll have seen more of the cliff face has eroded off, and sometimes you can see some amazing things, polystrate trees that stand up through what would be considered millions of years of layered
layers,
rocks
yeah.
and stuff like that, and I'm sure we'll get into that in another show. But currently, we've got about 24 billion tons of sediment that's removed from the continents per year. Now, in North America, geologists calculated that North America should have been leveled in about 10 million years if you, again, assume a constant erosion rate.
Right.
The same rates that we see today, North America wouldn't exist in 10 million years. So over a 10 million year time span, we shouldn't even see the continent if the rates were the same.
Right.
Of course,
and that's a big if. There are those assumptions again.
Well, North America is supposed to be 2.5 billion years old. So you've got a big challenge here. 2.5 billion versus 10 million, assuming constant rates, there's a way of measuring it. Now again, I don't believe in 10 million years, but it puts an upper limit to what we can say.
And again, all dating methods involve assumptions.
Right.
Even what we would consider the best dating method, go to the Bible. We talked about that last week.
Yeah.
The Bible is the best method of age dating the Earth, because you've got a reliable eyewitness account, a written record of people who were there when these things happened.
Right.
And it's still a faith position. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're accepting that the historical record that we find in the Bible is accurate, but it's far more better to make that faith assumption than make the faith assumption that these rates, some of which are preposterous anyways, that these rates have gone on at the same rate that we observe today. These processes have gone on at the same rates we observe today into the indefinite past.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I try to explain to people that if you don't accept the Bible, if you didn't accept the biblical account, like I used to not accept the biblical account, and of course, because I didn't even believe in God, I didn't ever look to the Bible. I would never have read it and read any of the stories like Noah's flood or anything like that, and never have taken them as literal history. Well, if you're going to put that to the side, you have to have, as a rational human being, you need a way to explain what we see around us.
Right.
You need a way to explain why are we here, and
sure.
what's the meaning of my life, and where did the fossil record come from, and how come things operate in this way, and you need a way to understand that. And if you don't accept the Bible, you're going to come up with another story, or you're going to try to come up with another story as to how that could have happened.
Well, really, that's what evolution is, isn't it?
It's exactly what it is.
It's an attempt by sinful man, all of us essentially,
yep.
but it's an attempt to explain our existence without God.
Right. Now the challenge is you've got so many people who've adopted that position. They start from a priori, position. I'm not going to accept God, so therefore we're going to look at the evidence differently. They come up with these concepts and ideas using scientific methods, but just interpreting the data differently. And then you've got Christians who are looking at those interpretations saying, oh boy, the evidence, the facts show that this is so I'm going to reinterpret what the Bible says. That's a complete wrong way around, right. Because you're actually looping through the atheists and the non-believers viewpoint first, and then coming back to Scripture. You should start from Scripture. That's what we're constantly telling people.
Right. Yeah. The flood is really the key to understanding a lot of these age dating methods and the age of the earth. In 2 Peter 3, I'm just thinking of that, 2 Peter 3 says that in the last days, scoffers will come. They'll
right.
deny a number of things. They'll deny that Christ is ever coming back.
Right.
And one of the things they'll deny as well is that there was a flood.
Right.
There was a global flood.
Worldwide
They're
flood.
saying all things continue as they were since the beginning of creation. But that's not accurate. All things have not continued as they were since the beginning of creation. There was a worldwide flood that dramatically upset the rates of many things that we're observing today.
Right. The father of modern biology, Charles Lyell, or geology, I should say, not biology, said the present is the key to the past. He set that concept, up where people would believe that things have always been going on at the rates we see today. The Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says it was a catastrophic worldwide flood.
Right. Rates of erosion, salt in the sea, and so on. Some of the things we've mentioned are going to be terribly upset if there was a global flood.
Right.
Those rates are not going to work out that way. Mm-hmm. So many people raised with this notion of millions of years. I'm just thinking of Emil Silvestru, one of our geologists at Creation Ministries.
Good friend.
He grew up in communist, atheist Romania as an atheist.
Wasn't an option.
It wasn't an option, almost. But he got his PhD studying millions of years.
Right.
And that's what he believed for many years. Then he became a Christian, and he recognized that given the conditions of a global flood, if there really was a global flood, then all of the process he'd come to be taught took millions of years, or took a long time, given today's rates, rainfall, erosion, and so on. He's a cave specialist, right? How caves form in limestone, right, and so on. Caves would take millions of years to form at today's rates.
Right.
But, or not millions of years, thousands of years in any case for caves to form. But given the conditions of a global flood, and to his credit, he recognized this and said, okay, a global flood would dramatically accelerate all these processes. So he was able to very, very quickly change his thinking from the millions of years scenario to, well, given the conditions of a global flood, all these things can happen quickly.
So the things that he observed in the field remained the same.
The observations don't change.
But his starting presupposition switched.
Right. So he was able to take those observations. He had been interpreting them one way,
right, millions
of years, evolution, and so on, and he was able to easily change that interpretation given the history in the Bible.
In 1853, archaeologists found a series of 12 tablets dated to around 650 BC, the story of the hero Gilgamesh. The Gilgamesh epic has close parallels to the account of Noah's flood and has led some skeptics to imply that the biblical account is a retelling of the Babylonian legend. However, there are major differences which give clues as to which account is more accurate. In the Gilgamesh epic, the ark is a cube, a terrible design for rough waters. Noah's ark was built to be tremendously stable. The Genesis account came first. The Gilgamesh epic is a distortion. For details, search on Gilgamesh at creationontheweb.org.
Young Earth. Dr. John Morris uses his many years as a creation science speaker and geology professor to present evidence for the young Earth in a clear, concise, easy-to-understand manner. The Bible states that the Earth was created in 6 days a few thousand years ago, yet we are bombarded every day by evolutionary theory presented as fact. Ages of the Earth and the universe are given in millions and billions of years. Obviously, both cannot be correct. This book contains much geological evidence for young Earth, but more importantly, how to think about geological evidence from a Christian perspective. Fossils, dating methods, and many of the assumptions that the theory of evolution requires are covered, suitable for high school to adult. So in the news, we always like to take a look at some of the things that are being reported on, and of course, I would say every day, at least every week, you can see many, many stories in the news pertaining to evolution and age of the Earth.
And their time scale.
Right, right.
Yes.
So here's one. It was titled Australian Mounds May Be 3 Billion-Year-Old Fossils.
3 billion years.
3 billion years. That's a lot of time. So it says odd-shaped mounds of dirt in Australia turn out to be fossils of the oldest life on Earth, created by billions of microbes more than 3 billion years ago, scientists say in a new report. And these mounds are exactly the type of life astrobiologists are looking for on Mars and elsewhere.
So astrobiologists are
biologists looking for life in outer space.
Right.
So you can actually get a degree in a science
astrobiology
that, folks, we haven't found any life in outer space. So you can get a degree in biology on things that don't exist that we know.
Is that kind of like atheism, where you try with all your might to explain away something that you know isn't there? but
That's a pretty neat,
anyway.
neat degree you can get. Anyway, it continues and says it's the best bet for the evidence of the oldest life on Earth, says Bruce Rennegar, director of the NASA Astrobiology Institute. There's an Institute of Astrobiology in California, and it says these are too complicated to be attributed to non-biological processes, but we don't know that for a fact.
It's just amazing how much of these news articles are how much evolutionary spin is put on there. What have they found? What are the observations? They found these mounds of dirt in Australia that look like they've been created by microbes, very, very small organisms.
Right.
Okay.
That's the fact.
What makes the news is that they're 3 billion years old.
Right.
But take away the time scale, and what have you got but mounds in Australia created by creatures?
Right.
You know, it's just, there's so many news reports like this. Here's another one. New imaging technique gives scientists, the title is X-rays reveal hidden structures of half-billion-year-old fossil embryos. Half-billion-year-old fossil embryos. The article says, a new imaging technique is giving scientists a rare and precious glimpse into the three-dimensional structure of tiny, unborn creatures that were frozen in time more than 500 million years ago. It goes on to say, the embryos are the oldest full embryonic body fossils of any complex animal ever discovered, and among the earliest embryos known. So, again, we can pick apart the observations from the time scale.
Right.
But they're observing these embryos. But it's interesting that the observations often aren't affected by the time scale. The observations are just observations, but in the news, these things are 500 million years old.
Right.
And then you've got this other information in there as well. The earliest embryos known. You've got this little evolutionary thing coming in there.
How do we know that the earliest embryos known? Because that's an assumption based on the time scale, which is based on an assumption.
Evolution.
Based on evolution.
That's right. And so it's difficult sometimes to pick out the data, what they're actually observing, from the evolutionary spin.
Right.
So the earliest embryos known. They are predated only by a 580 million year old embryo-like structure belonging to an organism thought to be part of the lineage leading to animals. Mm-hmm. So again, there's how much of that is data versus evolutionary spin. The article goes on to describe various details discovered, good observational science. Mm-hmm. They've observed this, they've observed their mouths, and they've observed different parts of these little fossil embryos. Later in the article it says, because of their tiny size and fragility, embryos are amongst the rarest types of fossils found. Okay, so is that evolution, or is that no? That's a good observation.
Right.
They're very rare. They are just gelatinous balls of cells that rot away within hours. But these fossils are the most precious of all because they contain information about the evolutionary changes that have occurred in embryos over the past 500 million years.
Now that's the first time in the article that, you know, I would pick up my antenna, of course, believing the Bible is true and that there was a global flood. I would say, well, if those things rot away in a very short period of time, what process could have preserved them so that they could form fossils in a very short period of time?
You think they would have had to be rapidly buried in some type of catastrophic event.
Right. Rather than the similar evolutionary story where oftentimes we're shown that fossils get made, you know, slowly over millions of years. You'd have to bury those things very quickly. What would have done that? Well, I think a flood would have been a good explanation.
Right. Here's another one here. Global warming caused mass extinctions 247 million years ago.
So global warming, that's a big issue.
Global warming, yes. But there was global warming in the past, too, apparently. John Roth shined his flashlight on a black streak flowing from the cream-colored marble forming the walls of the Oregon caves. The graphite line is graphic evidence of dramatic global warming that consumed so much oxygen that it nearly wiped out all life on the planet 247 million years ago. He goes on to say it was the biggest extinction by far of all time. Geologists and paleontologists all agree on that. The extinction that killed the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago wasn't anything compared to this, he says. And he goes on to say, or the article says, scientists aren't certain what caused the episode some 247 million years ago. It's kind of scary that we don't know for sure what caused the worst catastrophe of life on this planet. The graphite lines whose significance was recently recognized are not unique to the caves, which were formed perhaps 500,000 years ago.
So there's just this, you're just tossing around millions of years and millions of years, just like...
It's all over the place.
Right.
And you've got that evolutionary assumption there. Dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. Nobody's ever seen a real dinosaur. And
of course, we're going to do a show on dinosaurs because people are really
We've got to do a show on dinosaurs.
Yeah.
The article continues, with the annual cave tour season underway, the latest discovery will give guides yet another scientific topic to discuss with visitors. Right. I thought, a scientific topic, okay, they can talk about the graphite that they're seeing in the walls, but all the rest of it is speculation about what happened in the past.
Right. Now, basically, all these timelines you've been throwing around, I would assume from the article then that they're basing all that on the geologic column. That there was slow deposition over millions of years, and you can measure the rates. Or today, I guess they're saying that that there was fast deposition over millions of years, or different ways they're explaining the fossil
record
record
like
now.
that.
But anyway, that's all explained on that geologic column. What if that got laid down in a rapid, massive burial? It's like recorded in Noah's flood.
Well, that would eliminate a huge supposed evidence for millions of years.
Right.
If it wasn't laid down slowly and gradually, but if it was laid down rapidly during the flood, then you've got 500 million years. The fossil-bearing portion of the geologic record is now not the evidence for millions of years, it's the evidence for a global flood.
And it's brought down to 1 year.
Brought down to about a year, yeah, that's right. It's interesting, just in these articles we're seeing this mix of, and that's what we wanted to draw out with looking at these articles, a mix of observational science and evolutionary spin. And it's important for us as Christians to really understand, to separate the two.
Have you ever heard a biblical conversation like this? I just can't accept that Jonah was in the great fish for 3 literal days. The days could be referring to some undefined time period millions of years long. We can't know for sure what the word days means in Jonah. Would that sound reasonable to you? Of course not. From the context and grammar used, anyone that reads about Jonah in the Bible would easily come to the conclusion that Jonah was inside the great fish for 3 literal days. Do Christians argue that the days in Genesis are something other than literal days because the text is unclear? Not at all. The meaning of the word day in Genesis is as clear as day.
Biblical geology, properly understanding the rocks. Using easy-to-understand illustrations and terms, geologist Taz Walker shows how the Genesis account of a worldwide flood gives the best explanation for the rock layers that we see today. Is there geological evidence for a global flood? How do creationists answer critics who claim that the biblical account of Noah's flood was not feasible, or that the flood was merely localized, not worldwide? If you aren't convinced now, you will be after hearing this talk. Dr. Walker was involved with geological assessments of coal deposits in Australia and has visited many of the coal mines in Queensland while performing geological assessments of mining plans. A respected geologist, he is now the main speaker, writer at CMI Australia on flood geology. His expertise and insight provides a biblical framework of geology that leads to a new appreciation of the environments and processes of different geological phases of the Great Flood described in the Bible.
Another comment that we sometimes get is, well, you couldn't possibly get the world's population today, nearing 7 billion, in just the time since the flood. Noah and his family got off the ark after the flood, 8 people. You couldn't possibly get the population today in such a short period of time. Where are all the people? How could you think about these people? 6 billion people could fit into the size of England with more than 20 square meters each. So if you think of 6 billion people, it's just an interesting little fact.
Right. So you could sit the whole world's population in England?
In England. And each person with 20 square meters.
Wow.
But anyway, just an interesting little fact. Talking about population growth, the current population growth is about 1.7%.
Okay.
In other words, for every 100 million people, 1.7 million people are added every year.
Right.
So what growth rate is needed to get 6 billion people, I guess we're getting close to 7 billion, 6 billion people since the time of the flood about 4,500 years ago?
Right.
So today, population rate's about 1.7%. To get 6 billion people from 4,500 years ago, you need about 0.5%.
And that's starting with 8 people.
Starting with 8 people about 4,500 years ago.
Wow.
So it's no problem, even looking at population growth today, and considering the diseases in the past and wars and so on.
Because you said only 0.5% was needed.
Only 0.5% is necessary.
And the current rate's 1.7.
That's right.
So we got no problem fitting that in.
Now, what if people had been around for 1 million years?
Okay.
Right, and the mathematics works out to starting the population with 8 people about 4,500 years ago.
Right.
Evolutionists are saying that man evolved from apes about 1 million years ago. So over the last 1 million years, you've got people on the Earth.
Okay.
If the population had grown at just 0.01% for the last 1 million years, there could have been 10 to the 43rd people today. That's the number 10 with 43 zeros after it. If you do the math, that's not at 1.7%. It's not at 0.5%. It's at 0.01%.
Right.
You get 10 to the 43rd people on Earth.
Could have been born and died, and et cetera, et cetera.
Again, does that prove that the Earth is young? Does that prove that the population came from? Is that scientific proof that the population started? No, because there's assumptions involved with that. But it fits with that biblical history, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some people may have got this advice from their financial advisor, but I remember having someone say to me, what would you rather have, $1 million or a penny a day doubled for 30 days?
Oh, right.
And of course, your first inclination is go, I'll just take the $1 million because you're thinking in terms of pennies. But see, on day 1 you have 1 penny, on day 2 you have 2, then you have 4, then you have 8. Well, day 15 comes around, you don't have that much. But on day 30, it's like over $14 million or something ridiculous like that. It's called exponential growth. So that's it's not a direct
interest
it's not a direct analogy, but it's showing that from you start with 8 people, given the time span we're talking about, biblical time span, you more than easily account for it.
Another thing we could think about is, where are all the bodies? It's another way. Evolutionists believe that the Stone Age lasted for about 100,000 years.
Right.
The Bible suggests that the Stone Age lasted for perhaps a few decades after the event of the Tower of Babel. People may have lived in caves.
Right.
If you moved away from Babel, didn't have the technology to build, to smelt metal, you would have perhaps used stone tools, hence the Stone Age.
Right. If you dropped me off on a deserted island today, and I don't know how to make metal tools and stuff like that, I'd probably be looking for a cave.
You'd go back to a Stone Age type of culture.
Pretty
Not
fast.
That you're unintelligent. Anyways, Stone Age, apparently 100,000 years long, there could have been between 1 and 10 million people living at that time, over those 100,000 years.
Right.
Fossil evidence shows that people buried their dead. If there were just 1 million people, so on the low end of that estimate, just 1 million people alive during that time with an average generation time of 25 years, we should find 4 billion bodies. 4 billion bodies with the artifacts that they buried people with at the time of the Stone Age.
Wow.
Where are all the bodies? If it was 10 million people living throughout the Stone Age, 100,000 years, you'd have 40 billion bodies. And using the evolutionary timescale,
right.
You'd expect that the bodies would still be largely present after 100,000 years. So where are they all?
Right. Now, assuming too, because evolutionists believe that, well, I got taught anyway that, fossils got formed slowly over millions of years and stuff like that. So we're assuming that that process is correct and they're not just getting rid of them rapidly.
Right. Yeah, we're assuming that. Yeah. There's some other interesting evidences. This one you might find a little creepy. There's a company called LifeGem, and this company, what they do is they can take the leftovers from your cremated loved one. They take the carbon that's left over and turn it into graphite, and they can turn it in their presses. They can make diamonds out of the leftover carbon from your loved one.
That is a little creepy, yeah.
It's a little creepy, but anyways, we're told that diamonds take millions of years to form.
Right.
Everybody pretty much knows this. I got my wife a diamond ring when we got married. So diamonds are millions of years old.
Right.
But this company, LifeGem, is making diamonds from carbon in just a
people.
matter of weeks. On their website, they say this: a diamond that takes millions of years to occur naturally can now be created from the carbon of your loved one in about 24 weeks. And you can go to their website. You can read that there.
Yeah.
And here's some samples of some of their work. I mean, what you're looking at here are people. These are dead people, right? And you can do your pets too, apparently. So it's good fun. But what that tells me is, it doesn't take millions of years to make a diamond.
Right.
They can do it in about 24 weeks.
Right. So again, we're saying, okay, many people believe diamonds take millions of years to form, but no one's ever seen that. We have seen them form quickly.
Right.
We haven't seen them form slowly.
Right.
It's the same as the rocks. We have seen rock happen quickly, and we'll talk about that on an upcoming show.
Yeah,
how
it's called concrete.
Yeah, but even naturally, right? Because most people think of concrete as well.
Yes, well, still quite analogous to natural processes in some cases.
Yeah.
Another evidence. Let's move on to another one. Unfossilized dinosaur bones. There have been evolutionists, dinosaurs 65 million years old.
Right.
How can there be unfossilized dinosaur bones? Phil Curry, who's out at the Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller in Alberta, here in Canada, he had a dinosaur book, and in his dinosaur book he said this: a more spectacular example was found on the north slope of Alaska, where many thousands of bones lack any significant degree of permineralization or fossilization. The bones look and feel like old cow bones, and the discoverers of the site did not report it for 20 years because they assumed that they were bison, not dinosaur bones.
So totally unfossilized.
Yeah, here are these bones laying around, not fossilized.
It's like walking around in Montana and picking up a cow bone, like that kind of feel to it. And these are dinosaurs.
That's what they're saying. But they're dinosaurs.
I think they were. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So again, does that prove that dinosaurs lived recently? No, but it's consistent with that belief.
Right, because
dinosaurs living recently.
Yeah.
It's consistent with that. Here's another observation. We can take this a step further. Number of years ago, unfossilized Tyrannosaurus rex bones were discovered, and we wrote about this in Creation magazine, September 1998. And inside, the picture you're seeing here, you see in the middle here, these dark circles, they're red blood cells.
Right.
Red blood cells inside unfossilized Tyrannosaurus rex bones.
Now, that really flies in the face. I mean, people are always talking about, ways you would disprove a theory. I would say before this discovery, most people would say, well, it's ridiculous to think you would find red blood cells in a T-Rex skeleton. Like that would be a way to, falsify, the theory or the timescale or something like that.
The notion that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago.
But evolutionists are somehow saying, no, that this is still able to survive. I mean, somebody should get a hold of Red Cross if they think
blood cells can survive for 65 million years without refrigeration.
Right.
I know, good point. After this came out, and again, we wrote about that in Creation magazine, The details are there as well. All kinds of other interesting details. They tried to say that they're not red blood cells, but they are. Then a more dramatic example was discovered in March of 2005. Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she found what you're looking at here, soft and squishy material inside unfossilized Tyrannosaurus rex bones, including what appear to be blood vessels with red blood cells inside the blood vessels.
Right, you can squeeze the vessels in some form of plasma.
That's right. Little elastic blood vessels. You can stretch them out and they return to shape.
Right.
I mean, what more powerful evidence could you think of than this for dinosaurs living recently?
Right. Now, I've had people say to me, well, what evidence would you accept that the Bible's wrong? And of course, I'm a Christian, so I don't believe the Bible is wrong. But you know, it's the same way, because many evolutionists have turned around and said, okay, well, even though this flies in the face of the theory of evolution and that time scale, we're still going to believe that it could be that way.
The central teaching of Christianity is directly connected to Genesis. With the first man, Adam, came the first sin, seen in Genesis as violation of the law of God. The Bible teaches that God forgives sin, but only by a substitutionary sacrifice. God has provided salvation through His Son, the last Adam, Jesus Christ. The prophet Isaiah refers to Jesus as the kinsman redeemer, that is, one who is related by blood to those He redeems. All of us, including Jesus, are descendants of the first Adam. An historical first and last Adam are essential to the gospel message.
Finding answers to questions about the origins debate. Creation or evolution? When the results are in, which one is supported by scientific observations? Find out at creationontheweb.org. Creation scientists and researchers from around the world have contributed more than 5,000 articles, many of which appeared in leading creationist publications like Creation Magazine and the Journal of Creation over more than 30 years. A new daily front page article keeps web visitors informed about the latest breaking news in the creation-evolution debate. When news breaks about the latest evolutionary ape man, or some major supposed evidence for evolution, check out creationontheweb.org for a Christian creationist response. Each weekend, the website features a feedback article, a response to web visitors' email feedback. Often, the anti-creationist arguments in skeptics' emails are refuted in a detailed response by a CMI staff member. So in a very practical way, believers can see that the Bible, and particularly Genesis, can be defended against skeptics' arguments. The website includes an online store where you can browse through hundreds of the world's leading creationist books, DVDs, and related materials, all available to build up the faith of the believer. Got questions? Get answers at creationontheweb.org.
Okay, welcome back. Now this is the feedback section where we take comments that have been sent into the website.
Right.
And we've got an amazing letter here from a young person at a school. And this fits in so well with what we've been talking about both on this show and the previous show that we did, what the Bible says about the age of the earth. This is what science says about the age of the earth. It's from a young person at a school. And they wrote in and said, "Dear ladies and gentlemen, I was wondering how old the Earth is. Some people say that it's 1,000,000 years old, and others say it's 1,000 years old. How old do you think it is, and how can we tell? Please write back." This is from KS in the USA. Now, one of our scientists wrote back, and I'll just read the response. I think it's just it gives you an example of the kind of feedback. And typically this is on Fridays, the Friday feedback section. One of our scientists will take either a positive or a negative feedback, and they'll comment on it for the benefit of Christians around the world. And we can look at that kind of thing. I'll try to get through this here. There's no way to directly measure age. We can use rulers to measure length, scales to measure mass, thermometers to measure temperature, but there's no instrument that can measure how old something is. So if people want to know the age of something, they have to calculate how old it is. There are three main ways of calculating age. Number 1, using historical records in a calendar. Number 2, comparing the thing to a similar thing of known age.
Right.
Number 3, measuring the rate of some process and the amount of product that process produces, and working out how long it would take to produce that amount of that product at that rate of production. All 3 methods involve making some assumptions. And this
right.
We've been talking about this over and over. Assumptions are things we believe but which cannot be proven. For example, to work out your age, you could subtract the year of your birth on your birth certificate from the calendar year, from the current calendar year. This involves assuming that the information recorded on your birth certificate is accurate. Another way would be to measure your height and weight and then compare them to average heights and weights of children of different ages. Right. Whichever age group your height and weight is closest to, you're probably in that age group. This involves assuming that you are average and that there have been no events in your past, for example, sicknesses that have drastically affected your size. Another way would be to measure your rate of growth. For example, measure how big you are now and how big you are exactly in exactly 1 year's time. You could then divide your size now by the change in size since last year and get your age in years. This would involve assuming that you grew steadily at the same rate your whole life, which is an unreasonable assumption. I'm sure you can think of all sorts of events and circumstances that could affect these calculations, causing an age calculated this way to be inaccurate.
Right.
And this is just a simple way of kind of looking at some of the age dating methods that we've talked about
right.
in the last hour. He continues, when it comes to the age of the world, we use historical methods. Method number 1 above, which involve assuming or trusting particular records to be accurate. This is the way we at CMI, Creation Ministries International, our ministry, calculate the age of the earth. We trust the Bible to be a supremely reliable record of world history, and from the information in the Bible, we can calculate that the world is around 6,000 years old. Alternatively, that's what we've been doing on this show,
right.
You can measure the rate of change in a natural process and calculate from that, method 3 above. For example, radioactive uranium decays into lead. Scientists can measure how fast this is happening now. They can also measure how much lead is present in the rock, and they can calculate how long it would take for uranium to decay to produce that much lead, that quantity of lead. This involves making lots of unprovable assumptions. They must assume that all the lead came from the uranium, that no uranium or lead entered or left the rock since it was formed, and that the decay rate has remained constant. All of these assumptions are unprovable, and some are extraordinarily unreasonable. Making assumptions like these, many natural processes still produce ages of just a few thousand years, and we've talked about some of those just in the last hour. Only certain radioactive decay processes produce millions and billions of years, and if we are to change our assumptions, we can produce ages this way that match the biblical timescale. We are all fallen, fallible creatures, scientists included. Many scientists are as unwilling to repent from sin as anyone else. So they don't want there to be a God. They don't want to be reminded of their sin. So they are eager to make assumptions that exclude God and with which they can justify to themselves their own sinful natures. So they focus on certain radioisotope processes that produce Bible-contradicting ages and ignore far more numerous processes that produce Bible-compatible ages. I mean, that just sums up so beautifully what we've been talking about in these last 2 weeks. You look at the Bible, it gives an age for the year. You look at those genealogies, even if you want to get a ballpark figure, as we've said, I believe, on a previous show, Abraham lived about 2000 BC. No historian is going to suggest that he lived 8,000 BC. We know approximately when Abraham lived. And we know the years from Genesis 5 and 11, going back to creation. Adam was born 2,009 years before Abraham.
Right.
So you get a ballpark figure for the age of the earth of around 4,000 BC or 6,000 years ago.
Right.
It's a reliable method, and some of these other things, they also support the Bible in terms of the science that we see all around us. It's a great time to be a Christian.